a great song, a beautiful song. And we had basses. We had altos and tenors and sopranos and basses. And then right over in this section over here were the monotones. And but it was fun listening to that song as well as singing the song. So how many of you can remember this slogan, obey your thirst? Anyone remember that one there? Any of you teenagers, you guys remember that slogan, obey your thirst? Well, the reason why you probably don't remember it because that thing goes way back. In 1994, Coca-Cola came out with this campaign that where it was a campaign that came from a number of different kinds of directions, but it was all a campaign to get people to drink this lemon lime drink called Sprite. And its genesis came out of the hip-hop movement. I don't know if you knew that or not, but a number of hip-hop artists were used to obey your thirst. And then they brought in a number of professional athletes, mostly NBA stars, who came in, and they were all talking about this idea of obeying your thirst. And they would show them all sweaty and perspiring and things like that. And then they'd show them tipping up a Sprite, a refreshing drink, and they'd be talking about this idea of obeying your thirst. The slogan, it went for like 25 years, so it was a very popular slogan, and they used it for going in a lot of different directions, but nevertheless, it was one that people really liked, and it really caught on with groups of people, and Sprite became a huge soft drink because of that, obeying your thirst. Okay, so here's the question tonight. What are you thirsty for? What is it that you feel parched for? What is it that maybe is a famine in your life where you need some refreshment or something that deals with your thirst? Well, in Revelation chapter 21, verses 6 through 8, there John talks about this idea of obeying your thirst, but before he did that, in the 20th chapter, he talks about a judgment scene at the judgment throne of God. And it's really a heartbreaking section of Scripture because it talks about those who go into an everlasting punishment or a second death or a lake of fire. And then in chapter 20, he talks about a new heaven and a new earth. And finally, he gets down to verse 6 and he says this. He said to me, "It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. I will give to the one who thirsts from the spring of the water of life without cost. He who overcomes shall inherit these things, and I will be his God, and he will be my son. But for the cowardly and unbelieving and abominable and murderers and immoral persons and sorcerers and adulterers all liars, their part will be in the lake that burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death." But notice before he gets to talking about the cowardly and a number of different kinds of individuals and the sins that they are partaking in, he talks about this water of life. And he says that anyone who thirsts of it can come to this water and can find satisfaction in it. And so when it comes down to obeying our thirst, are we obeying our thirst? What are we the most thirsty for? Because what Jesus says is that he is an oasis in a very parched land. And if you come to me, then you'll find a sense of relief. If there is some kind of famine that's going on in your life, if there's some kind of sin that's brought you into an isolated place or a famine in your life, a desert in your life, you can find a relief that is there from this water that can take care of you in incredible kinds of ways. But when you think of thirsty, automatically I thought of John the 4th chapter. And in John the 4th chapter, there is a record there of a woman from Samaria who obviously is extremely thirsty. There it says in verse 7 of John chapter 4, it says, "There came a woman of Samaria to draw water. Jesus said to her, 'Give me drink,' for his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. The Samaritan woman therefore said to him, 'How is it that you, being a Jew, ask me for a drink since I am a Samaritan woman? For the Jews have no dealings with Samaritans.' Jesus answered and said to her, 'If you knew the gift of God and who it is who says to you, "Give me a drink," you would have asked him, and he would have given you this living water.' She said to him, 'Sir, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where then do you get that living water? You are not greater than our father Jacob, are you, who gave us this well and drank of it himself and his sons and his cattle?' Jesus answered and said to her, Everyone who drinks this water shall thirst again. But whoever drinks of the water that I shall give him shall never thirst, but the water that I shall give him shall become in him a well of water springing up to eternal life. The woman said to him, Sir, give me this water so that I will not be thirsty, nor come all this way here to draw. And he said to her, Go call your husband and come here. Here is a woman who is thirsty. But she's thirsty more than just for physical water. She doesn't know that. I mean, deep inside, subconsciously, she may know that she's in a famine and that she is in a desert of her life and that she's thirsty for something, but she hasn't identified it. And so Jesus asked her for this water. And he says, I offer you some living water. I'm offering you water where you'll never be thirsty again. You won't have to come to this well to draw water. There is a water that can spring from within you, and a water that can spring from me where you'll never be thirsty again. So how do I know that she's in famine? Because she's there by herself. Most of you probably have heard lessons on this and sermons on it. I know I've preached on it and taught on it numerous times. But why is she there by herself? Normally, that was a social time for women when they got together and they would walk out from that city, which is probably Sychar, and they'd move out from Sychar and walk up a trail to this well of Jacob, and there they would take water. But as they'd walk there with their girl, the other ladies, their friends, they would talk about family. They would talk about different kinds of things that they were doing. It was a day of just having conversation with one another. There's probably a lot of laughing and enjoying each other's company. It was just a great day. But here, this woman is all by herself. Well, why is she by herself? Well, socially speaking, she was probably a pariah. She was probably pretty harshly judged. She had a number of husbands. The one man that she is living with now he's a shack-up job. She's not married to him. She's got a bad reputation, and so she's there all by herself. No doubt she feels lonely. No doubt she feels isolated from the rest of the people. There is a thirst that is deep within her soul. And Jesus offers her something. And when she identifies him as the Messiah and he reveals himself to her, she goes into the city and she begins to tell everyone. And all of a sudden, her reputation is going to change a lot. And she's going to find some living water, something that's going to be real to her. Maybe you feel the passion of David as he talked about this very thing in Psalm 42 and verses 1 and 2. Listen to what he says. As a deer pants for streams of water, so my soul pants for you, O God. My soul thirsts for God, for the living God. When can I go and meet with God? I think probably you have to possibly visit Israel to get an idea of how David would view water. He's a shepherd. He more than once found himself in a desert running for his life. And if you have been to Israel and been in that part of the country where Beersheba is in that area, then it's a super arid place. The closest place to it maybe is parts of Arizona's like that. If you went down into Death Valley in California around Ridgecrest, that's a little bit like that. If you go to a lot of Nevada, you can find arid places like that, especially as you get more towards the mountains. They become very rugged places. Water is a scarce commodity, a scarce thing. And David, he knows about that. And so he uses this word, as a deer pants for the streams of water in an arid place. Have you ever seen a deer panting? Have you ever seen an elk panting? I remember one time was hunting up in Midvale and was deer hunting, but I was on a ridge and I was looking down across a draw and I saw these elk coming from probably 3 miles away and over several mountains several mountain ridges in between us, and I watched them as they crossed over, and then finally they ran across in front of me. And I remember as they were running, there were cows going, a few satellite bulls were along with them, and then there was just one huge bull, probably at least maybe a 5 or 6 point bull. He was huge, but he's running in behind him and he's looking over his shoulder, and I remember I'm glassing him, and I'm sitting, and his tongue is hanging out, and those things have really long tongues, but his tongue is hanging out. He's absolutely exhausted. He's panting for water, and as he crossed over, they dropped down into the Sagian Creek there where there was water that was there. As a deer or maybe as an elk pants for the streams of water, so my soul pants after you, O God. My soul thirsts for God, for the living God. When can I go and meet with God? He understands that God is the spring. He understands that God is the water. And when he felt so isolated, when he felt like there was a famine in his life, he related it to a deer that pants for water. And he says, and that's how I feel myself. That's how I feel myself inside. I'm panting for water. I'm panting to be refreshed. And he knows that God is the only one that can do that. There are some, I think, that thirst like that. We want this white-hot intensity, this passion in our heart for God. We're thirsty for a living water that can satisfy us. God is the central picture in our minds. He's the one that we want more than anyone. And the great thing about this is that it's free. The water is free. There's no hoops that you have to jump through. There's not anything, no fees you have to pay, because it wouldn't matter, because you could never jump high enough, and you could never pay enough money to purchase the mercy and the grace and the love and the care of God, this water that he has to offer. It's something that is offered free. I love the way Paul said in Ephesians 2, verses 8 to 9, he says, for it's by grace that you have been saved through faith. This is not from yourselves. It is the gift of God, not of works, so that no one can boast. Something that is freely given. Water that is freely given to us. Salvation that is freely given to us. A relationship with God that is freely given to us, that we don't have to purchase. We don't have to jump through hoops. We don't have to do anything. We just have to accept it. In fact, you become a child of God, as John said, by God's mercy. Listen to John 1, verses 12 through 13. Yet to all who received him, to those who believe in his name, he gave the right to become the children of God. Children not born of natural descent, nor of human decisions or a husband's will, but born of God. At times, John becomes overwhelmed with a thought that God has given us opportunity to be his children. And it has nothing to do with our race. It has nothing to do with our gender. It has nothing to do with any of those things. We have been called to God. And God calls us by his great love. How great is the love of the Father that is lavished on us, that we should be called the children of God, and that's what we are. He said that in John 3 and verse 1. And then, of course, there are others who are different minded. There are others who are not thirsty after God. You see people who are perplexed about their passions. Should they remain in them? Should they get out of them? Their hearts maybe are hard, or maybe they are satiated with their sin. Listen again to what John says in Revelation 21 and verse 8. But the cowardly, the unbelieving, the vile, the murderers, the sexually immoral, those who practice sorcery or magic arts, the idolaters, and all the liars, their place will be in the fiery lake, burning sulfur. This is the second death. And so some might say, well, I don't practice any magic arts, and I haven't murdered anyone. But I think what John is doing is that he's sharing several behaviors that are merely symptoms of a heart that has sought refuge in other things rather than God. They're thirsty. They're in a desert. They're in famine. And so they search for relief from other places that it's only going to get them in a lot of trouble when the water is right there before them. Jeremiah wrote this condition, Jeremiah 2 and verse 13 says, my people have committed two sins. They have forsaken me, the spring of living water, and have dug their own cisterns, broken cisterns that cannot hold water. Okay, so I think probably for a lot of you in here, maybe this doesn't make a lot of sense. When you talk about cisterns. And when I was born in Oklahoma, down in the southeastern corner of the state. I remember the first time I told Lori, I was taking Lori there to visit my relatives and see my relatives. I remember telling her, now listen, you need to understand something about this part of the country. You're going to be backing up in time like 30 years. And I don't think she believed me until we got there. And then she goes, wow, this is like 30 years ago. And of course, I don't think we were even 30 years at that time, age 30, but I remember those years. And I remember that I was born in a farmhouse on top of a hill, and we had two sources of water. One source of water was a water well that they had dug the well, and we used a large torpedo plunger about this long and about this wide, and you drop it down to the water, and you get the water, and then you pull it up, and you take the water and you pour it into like maybe a 3-gallon pail or a 1-gallon pail of water, and then you took it inside the house and set it there, and that was the community water pail. So if you wanted a drink of water, everyone drank from that same water pail. There was a dipper that was above it, and you'd go in and take a dipper and dip it into the water and take a drink of the water and put it up there for the next guy or gal. Except for when my Granny Let took a drink of Granny Let, she chewed snuff. And so when she would drink from the water, and then there was sometimes snuff in the water, and so as a little kid, you'd walk up and say, there's snuff in that water, so you back off for a while, let it sink to the bottom, and then drink from the top. Well, that was one way to drink water, from a water well where you drew the water. And that's how lots of people did it long before there was, plumbing and all those things. I don't think there was plumbing in my grandma's house until I was like 12 years old. The other source of water was a cistern. And outside the back door of the kitchen was a large cistern, which was a large well that had been dug and then lined up with rocks around it, and then it caught all the water that came from the rainy season. And in Oklahoma, when it rains there, it's not like that rain out there. When it rains, Clinton would tell you, it rains. I mean, like big rain. And so there was a funnel that went off the side of the house that went down into the cistern, and the water would go into the cistern. And the water that was in the cistern, that was for taking baths. That was for washing dishes. That was for washing clothes and things like that. What Jeremiah is saying is that people have forsaken the pure, clean spring water that is there for them, and they have hewed out cisterns of water that are broken that really can't hold water. And even if they did hold water, it would not be good water, because that water that's inside that cistern gets old. There's not a living stream that feeds it. The water goes in and it is depleted by using it. Other than that, the water goes stale or the water gets old. We would call it dead water. And that's what he's saying. He says, these people have dug cisterns for themselves, thinking that they're going to satisfy their thirst, but those cisterns cannot hold water. And if they did hold water, they would not satiate the water that they need. They need living water, like we all need living water. That's what Revelation 21 is about. I'm the Alpha and the Omega. I'm the beginning and the end. I am the one that can offer you satisfaction in life. Satisfaction in life that can lead to eternal life. These other things that people get caught up in is a dead end. It's a broken cistern. It can never satisfy you. It can never completely help you. And so what we might need to do this evening is to stop for a moment and think to ourselves, what am I thirsty for? And my answer to you is, listen, if you're thirsty for God, you need to obey your thirst. Take care of your, obey it. And this evening would be a great time to do it if you hadn't already done so. While together we stand and sing and give you opportunity to respond.